Question number 6. The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Mr. Speaker, this question is to the Prime Minister and asks, does he stand by all his statements, and if so, how?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, yes, by standing here and saying so.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Does he stand by a statement in November last year that refugees, and I quote him, go through a proper vetting process and a lot of work is done to establish that they are genuine refugees? If so, why?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, in answer to the first part of the question, yes.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Does he have confidence in the Refugee Status Branch, who are responsible for approving or declining applications for refugees and protection status in New Zealand? If so, why?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I don't have intimate knowledge of them. The member would really need to put that question down to the Minister, but I don't have any advice that should have concern to me.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston Peters.
If he doesn't have advice, then why did he make the statement in the first place, given that the Immigration Protection Tribunal has overturned hundreds of decisions since 2011 made by refugee and protection officers who have interviewed each claimant, and would he agree that the claim process is seriously flawed?
There's 2 questions there. The Prime Minister can address one of them. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The member using his big growly voice won't make me feel any more frightened. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, we stand by the view because there's a very thorough process that both UNHCR go through and then our own immigration people when it comes to vetting people who come to New Zealand.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Why would he make the statement that refugees, quotes, go through a proper vetting process and a lot of work is done to establish that they are genuine refugees, in quotes, if he doesn't know, given his previous answer, that that is a fact?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Because it's correct, and because if the member goes back and looks at the question he asked me, it was about the particular entity in question, whether I had any concerns about them. And I don't know information about the particular entity. I know about the process, but I haven't had any information that would indicate to me there's a problem about the entity.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston
Amongst
Peters.
numerous examples, how could an Iranian man granted refugee status in 1998 on fraudulent grounds, subsequently make 6 return trips to Iran, have that refugee status revoked in 2007, yet overturned by the tribunal in 2013?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member would appreciate I can't comment on an individual case.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston Peters.
How can the Prime Minister assure New Zealanders that we are not allowing in people who don't respect our laws and allowing people coming here to treat women as cattle unless they are first fully vetted?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there's 2 important points to the debate. I mean, firstly, people are vetted, and part of that vetting includes an interview to see whether they're likely to have and share the sorts of values that are consistent with New Zealand society. Secondly, when they come to New Zealand, as part of the process they go through at Mangere, there is an induction to New Zealand way of life. It includes things like New Zealand's laws and customs and culture, includes aspects of the way of our life, like how we treat women and children, that homosexuality is okay, and how we treat our environment.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston
Putting
Peters.
aside that no one knows where Mangere is.
Can I have the supplementary question, please, without the lead-in? Order.
Yeah, that's why you got wiped out, son.
Order.
That's why you lost it.
Order. Order. Can I refer the member to Speaker's ruling 191? Supplementary questions must not be prefaced with a statement. If the member could now ask a supplementary question, please.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Prime Minister, who does he have confidence in, the refugee and protection officers who interview each claimant or the tribunal who in countless cases have subsequently overturned their decisions on appeal.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I have confidence that the system at all levels works.
Speaker, can I point of order?
Point of order. The Right Honourable.
I tabled two documents. The first is a very difficult to find court case, a tribunal case.
Order. I want to hear this in silence.
Yes, dated 2 May 2013. And the second is a refugee and protection claim process map prepared on request, that is from MB 2015.
I will put the leave for both those documents, a tribunal case dated 2nd May 13 and an MB document. Is there any objection to that? There is objection. Question number 7, Scott